There we are in the place to be.
All right, hey, good morning, everyone. Kirk Anderson here with the Kirk Anderson Show. Today I have a special guest, someone that many of you may know, but we'll get into some introductions. A little bit of background on how I met my guest, Jeff Virchow. Originally, we served together on the City Council in St. Croix Falls, and the reason that he's here today is because he opted to step away from politics to take on a project that was near and dear to his heart. He has deep roots in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, and his family has actually written some really interesting works on the city, or his wife's family, I guess. It's
right.
You're just there by default.
That's right.
We
That's
all are.
True.
But a lot of the history of St. Croix Falls was recorded by your mother-in-law and in a book. And so as I became mayor, I received a copy of that book and have really enjoyed learning more about St. Croix Falls in general. So when you were on the city council, we got a lot accomplished, and I think we did. And one of the things that we fought really hard for was this project, the Civic Auditorium.
That's true.
And so I want to just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about who you are, what you do now, and how you got into being a contractor on this project.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. First off, thank you for having me on here. And you know that I'm always eager to talk about this project. This is, like you say, very near and dear to me and my family. My name is Jeff Virchow. I'm a longtime resident, well, I guess 37, 38 years now in the community. During my career days, I was not able to give back. I spent more time in airports than I did in St. Croix Falls during those years, but since my retirement, I've had the opportunity to start getting more involved in the community, and it's led me down this path to this project. Like you said, we served on the city council together, in my case for 3 years, your case longer. And one of the reasons that I got onto the council was to bring this project forward. It's very near and dear, like you mentioned, and well, incidentally, my wife's great-grandfather, so my children's great-great-grandfather, was the city supervisor of St. Croix Falls in 1916 when this original project came up, and so he was Ben Clayton. He was very instrumental in putting this all together. And then you mentioned my mother-in-law, Rosemarie Bratz Vizina, who was quite the historian, and through the Standard Press and her book, Tales and Trails, has really told the story of a lot of this community over many years. So
you should say that book is available on Amazon still.
it is.
And
it is.
you can check it out at the library. I know they have a couple copies, and I have one in my hallway that has been viewed many times and nobody's taken it, so don't come in and take the book.
It's also available at the Information Center, and it's available at the Historical Society.
Okay.
Has copies of it as well. So
Great. Well, that's that to me is a big part of the history of the city, and I know that the Historical Society relies on the information in that book as well, and a lot of the photos they're hard to come by. You know, you think on the internet you can look up and find a photo of anything, but a lot of those historic ones are in the historical library in an archive somewhere. So before we get started, I want to just acknowledge a good friend of mine, Rhett Bozen, who's my sponsor, and I'm going to just hit him up for 15 seconds with a short break. Are you ready for a new cell phone or cellular service provider? Rhett Bozen's an AT&T authorized retailer and is ready to get you connected. Skip the store and get personalized support at your business or home. Call Rhett today at 715-771-3535. All right, be sure if you are looking for a new service plan for your phone or just a new phone to contact Rhett and mention the Dryden Wire name to get show specials. So we're going to talk today about what it takes to renovate a historic site, not just an old building, but this is a building that is on the National Historic Registry, which comes with all sorts of rules and regulations and things that they require you to do in order to really push forward this project. Not only the planning and the work, but also the finances, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Sure. If you are watching, and we do have some people watching, and you've ever been to the Civic Auditorium, either as when it was a lease space from the Festival Theater, or way back when it was a movie theater back in the 50s, 60s, 40s. Apparently they used to do silent films there, and then it kind of moved forward into the history. So if you've ever done that or you have questions, feel free to ask them, put them in the comments, and we'll try and share them as part of the show. So let's take a look at a couple pictures, and this will just kind of lead the conversation. Sure. This is a picture of the 1917 Civic Auditorium, and it's in pretty good shape right there. Do you have any information on how old this picture is, or what was going on?
This picture was taken in 1920, so the building is only 3 years old at that point. And you know, it's interesting because built in 1917 and in 1920, it had already been remodeled upstairs.
Really?
So the building, the city had to pivot to some things early on after the construction of the building came. So we can talk a little bit more about that if you like.
Yeah, I think the period at which they chose to build this couldn't have been at a more complex time, right? I mean, think about 1917, and I know for all you non-historians who probably don't think back that far, but I love history. 1917 was right at the time the world was at war in World War I. And so the city, a number of years before that, went through a whole process of building this beautiful auditorium, planning it, saving up money. Do you remember the original cost of this in the 1915-ish area where they were budgeting for this?
Yeah, it was, I believe, under $20,000 for the total building cost.
Which is insane.
Which is insane. It's insane. And you know, I look back at that era, 1917, in the community, the village at that time of St. Croix Falls, population of approximately 900 people, and the city and the community got together and said, we want to commit resources to build a civic auditorium that seats 400 people.
Wow, yeah.
You know, it's a pretty amazing thing that they did to invest themselves into this community for the long haul.
Yeah.
So I really commend them for their foresight.
And I did read on your website that they did have some fairly big speakers that came down. Some gentlemen running for president. Made the running mate was from Milltown. Now it was the Socialist Party.
It was the
I won't
Socialist
give too many.
Party.
I won't give opinions on what I think about socialism, but wow, they used the Civic Auditorium for their meeting space, and people gathered there. That really is what it was meant for. So
yes,
kudos to them.
Yes, very much so.
So in 19 1917, they got this thing completed. The idea was going to be a playhouse, vaudeville theater, and it was going to be kind of the scene for people to go. And then, boom,
it was
World War II.
Yeah, it was kind of the hub. And,
Or World War I.
World War One. Well, and right then, the Spanish flu epidemic.
Yeah.
So that was a big part of what was happening during those turbulent times, like you were talking about, World War One in 1918, the Spanish flu epidemic. The city scrambled to turn the downstairs of this newly constructed building into a Red Cross prep facility, as well as a hospital for a lot of the illness, the flu people that needed treatment there. And like I said, then in upstairs, it started as a vaudeville, and what I think happened is they forgot a little bit about how difficult it was to get from Minneapolis to St. Croix Falls.
Right.
At that time. The road structure wasn't really good. It was still
It's still
dirt.
not that great.
It's, it was dirt and it was muddy and all of that stuff.
So taking a stagecoach with your play to come up and do a show was probably not the most convenient thing, even though it's only 50 miles. It would have taken a lot.
It would have taken a lot. So they pivoted early. And so in later part of 1918, they remodeled the upstairs to put in a projection room and turn that, the theater space into a silent movie picture show, theater. So they contracted with R.O. Pepper, who ran the silent pictures out of the Oddfellows Hall up here right on North Adams Street. He came down and took over the theater, and incidentally the theater stayed in the Pepper family until 1985 when it shut down. So
interesting.
It's quite an interesting colorful past.
Yeah. So after the epidemic hit, they did some World War I Red Cross work there, rolling bandages, things like that. It was a hospital. Over the years, this building has been many things, municipality-wise, because it's a city-owned business. I think that they had some parts of City Hall there, police department. The library was there for many years. And then at some point, the Festival Theater became a tenant there and really just kind of took ownership of the building on a long-term lease until it was vacated in 2015. So just to give a little eye candy to what we're talking about, I'm going to just go through some pictures and then we can discuss some of these things. St. Croix Falls is known for its falls, although they're not falls. It's a hydroelectric dam that was built in the very early 1900s, 1905 or 6. And so this picture is probably after, a little bit after that, because you can see in the upper left-hand corner a very small image of the Civic Auditorium at that time. So this would have been post 1917, but you can tell that the hydroelectric dam, although probably completed, is pretty rough still. There's still a lot of debris around and things like that. So interesting old picture, and just really neat to see some of the old buildings that are on Main Street, and then that, of course, the historic theater that you get to spend a lot of time in. So we can just appreciate that it's been around for a long time. This is our Main Street, and the building on the far right with all the windows was called the Vincent House. So we are facing north in this picture, and the Vincent House was the building that I'm in right now. It's no longer the Vincent's house. This was purchased in the 50s and torn down to make way for the First National Bank. And then that was purchased by the Eagle Valley Bank, which renovated that space even more. Now, my office where we're sitting in this back room where I've got pallet walls and everything, when I moved in here, we had some issues that we had to tear the walls out, and I spent a lot of time fixing the original foundation to the Vincent house. And so it's really quite interesting. The back of the building is still the original old poured concrete with all the old electrical. And if you go to the alleyway behind my building, you can see rings where you would be able to hook up a horse and to the wall where now we park. So the history's still there. You just have to look for it. So interestingly enough, so this picture is pretty neat. You can see the old cars, the power lines just strewn everywhere. I don't think they spent a lot of time thinking through a lot of that. And then, of course, the dirt roads. And so if you backed up on Main Street, looking on here, you can see more of our Main Street with the gas station, the cars. And unfortunately, they don't, unless you can look up the number on there in the historic archives, they don't put a lot of information with these photos, so you got to kind of take note of them. And I found that some of the information you find online is not entirely accurate, and it's better to go talk to people on Facebook who know and just say, hey, does anybody know any information about this photo? And then you'll get lots of older guys that love to talk about it. The original, this map, Sanborn map, was real popular around communities. They would draw up all the streets and waterways and fire maps and things like that. And so there's an archive of these online. This was dated September 14th, 1917. And you can look in the yellow area with the number 2 on it. That is Louisiana and Main Street. So you can see the hydroelectric dam right across the street. And that's where the theater sits now. So pretty cool hand-drawn map, and I just love that kind of stuff. So talk about these photos. These are 2 photos from the past, things that happened at the auditorium. And
yeah, sure. You know, while the upstairs was playing movies and really doing a good service to the community in that way, the downstairs space, which started out as just civic community space, was doing things like, the high school proms. Were all in that space. The basketball team, the high school basketball team, played their games in the first floor space of the auditorium for many years before they built their gymnasium up on the hill. So so the mezzanine level of the first floor space was actually the viewing area for the basketball games that were going on down below. That wall was open and
that's
stuff.
crazy.
So they had a lot of community events, dances in this case, is very active during the 30s and 40s, and then the picture on the right is, I believe, from 1941, just showing a movie poster that was going on just, pre-World War II, or at least in, that was just the year that we got into the war, I guess, 1941, right? So
this is in front of the auditorium. The doors would be to their right, our left.
Correct.
And so they would have a movie poster there. Many of the photos I see of my mom and dad when they were teenagers, they were dressed like that. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. other things that happened in the
Yeah, so
theater
once that community space kind of, I don't know, went a little by the wayside, and there were a series or a number of sewing factories that took over the first floor space for many years. And this picture, I think, is 47 or right in there, of Munsing ware. And look at all of the people that were employed there and housed in the auditorium for their workspace. It's pretty interesting. And I love that truck.
Yeah.
I wish I had one like that, actually.
Yep.
But
The sewing factory was a big part of it. So if you've ever been in the auditorium, probably where the library used to be, there's that big area. Would that be?
that is the first floor space. That yes, it's about a little over 2,000 square feet down there, and you know that doorway in the back leads to the boiler room, and there was a little kitchen back there too originally. So it was a good space to do things like that in it. So it was a good purpose for it.
That's crazy. So when you say that they played sports in there and did all of that, did they have like a full court, or do they play half court? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a space.
It's not that big of a space, and I really wish, Kirk, that we had some photos inside photos of that, and we, you know, if anybody out there has any photos in their albums, we would certainly appreciate seeing some. It's been very difficult for us to secure any interior photos of that space during that time period.
Well, I think this photo of the sewing one, that's a great photo, capturing, you know, the working conditions and just, you talk about an open floor plan. Yeah. And this is pre-cell phones. You're not going to be playing solitary or anything. You're working.
You're working.
So the upstairs space was and still is very much historic, and one of the things that the historic preservation required for you to keep some of the old seats.
All of the old seats,
And so I'll move the photo up a little bit. So all these are the original. Are they original, or were they replaced at some point?
You know, they how that went, I believe, is the movie theater started early in 1918 as silent movies, and incidentally, R.O. Pepper, because it was silent movies, he hired musicians 6 days a week to play in the auditorium to complement the silent picture. And if he was playing a war movie popular during that era, he would go back out into the alleyway and set off fireworks again to complement the. So it's pretty interesting, and he did that all the way up until talking movies came about. And I think the first talking movie, if I remember right, it was like 1927. I seem to remember The Jazz Singer as the first talking movie to come out. Shortly after that, the building got renovated again. So they had to add acoustical panels into that theater space because it was silent movies before that. So they did that. They ripped out all of the original wooden seats and put in these updated seats. This would have been early in the 30s.
Okay.
So those seats have been in there since that time.
Okay. And as I understand it, you're repurposing the balcony back to being able to have seating up there, but all the seats were missing. And so as we look at this photo, is it true when you tore up the stage, you found the original seats to be able to put back up there? Is that
Yeah, and how that story goes is originally in the building, that stage that you're seeing there was not there. The stage was simply the backstage, just
that small
behind
thing
that
behind the wall.
behind that proscenium arch, that was the stage. It did not project. So there were seats that went all the way up to that wall, basically.
Okay.
So when Festival Theater came in 1990, they started adding to the stage front and taking out seats and putting them underneath the stage because they didn't have any place to put them in.
Toss them in the garbage.
Thankfully, they kept them. So we did find a lot of seat parts down there, which gives us enough seats to put up in the balcony and reutilize that space.
So this photo, I believe, was like a high school play of some sort. Do you know if that happened a lot here? Did the high school utilize the auditorium for drama and things like that?
Yeah, they sure did, and really all the way up through 2015 when the building went silent again. You know, my kids' names are written in the walls of the backstage because they performed plays. I believe your children as well.
One of my oldest daughter performed one time when she was 8 or 9, and it was a children's festival theater production, and then the building closed. So my kids are really amped up to get back in there. My oldest will not be able to perform there unless he performs as an adult. He did a lot of black box theater, and my daughter is only 17, so she still has an opportunity to maybe do one show there if it happens soon. So
well, and we're very excited to get Festival Theater back into their home building and completely renovated for them, and pretty exciting times here in town.
I think, you know, the photo kind of speaks, as I look at old photos in your mother-in-law's book, no matter what people are doing, if they're at the ski slope, which is now our football field, and they're watching people ski. I saw a movie on Facebook, someone had like a 8mm or 16mm footage of this that they digitized and shared. They're all wearing suits and hats and look nice. There's several photos that the Historical Society has been reposting on Kentucky by the Clayton Hardware and up Kentucky by the old middle school, and everybody worked really hard to look nice. And I think we could go back there maybe a little bit. Yeah. So this is the fire. This is like a fire retardant backdrop?
Yeah, it's a backdrop scene, and it was used as the fire curtain. So it's woven out of asbestos cloth. And in fact, that was the biggest asbestos culprit in the building. And we had two choices. We try and encapsulate it to make it safe, or we would have had to destroy it.
Okay.
So our choice was to encapsulate it and keep that history alive in the building. So that curtain still flies in the back tower of the building and will be ever present.
Nice. So it is safe. Obviously, with asbestos, you must have had to coat it with something that would protect it, but also seal it so that it was not dangerous.
Yes, yes. And all other asbestos that was in the building has been abated.
Okay.
So,
very cool. So what I think is interesting, you said that for less than $20,000 they built this building. In 2015, and I won't get into a total history of it because I wasn't on the city council back then, but the city council had set up a project with a TIF district that set aside money to help fund a hotel that would have been an addition to this building, and it would have renovated the space. The hotel made it a for-profit business, and so there would have been a tax increment which allows you to use tax increment financing. It took me a long time as a city council person to figure out what in the world a tax increment district is. I'm pretty good at it now, but YouTube videos helped a lot. So you have to be able to raise the taxes or the value of a property in order to use tax increment financing. And so there's some interesting conversations around that. But we had a chunk of money that had been set aside, and it was at this point a use it or lose it proposition, because if you didn't use it, you had to redistribute it back to the taxing entities. And we also had a number of grants, really good grants from different organizations, nonprofits, and then private funding that was raised. In total, what does it cost to take a historic building that was abandoned for darn near 7-8 years, had a flood, had all sorts of issues, and now you're going to turn it back into this beautiful building that's going to be a centerpiece for our city, and it's for profit.
Yes.
You're going to have renters and tenants and pay taxes and the whole thing. So
Yes.
What does that cost? Like, how do you even wrap your head around that?
It took me quite a while too, Kirk. Well, the short answer is it costs a lot. We're in a situation where it probably is like maybe not the worst, but not the best time to be doing the project. Labor costs are up, interest rates now. Supply issues from the COVID pandemic still happening. So our timing was bad, but the cost of the project now, from the original $20,000 build on that is to renovate this building is overall about a $4 million project. $3.5 million of that is construction costs, and about $500,000 for the architects and the consultants and everything behind the scenes that it takes to put this all together.
So nobody would be being honest if we hadn't heard, why don't you just tear this thing down? And there's a reason that we have historic buildings and that people want to preserve them. So you're in it deep with the family and the history, and your family's been in this community back since its inception as a city and a town. Why do you think it's important to save an auditorium that is of historic value to some people, but not necessarily all?
Not necessarily all. I do understand that, but it's very difficult for me, being a longtime resident, to throw away 107 years of history. This building has been really the fabric of our community for over 100 years. I can't see it. I couldn't. I had to jump in, I guess, as far as that goes. And I do want to say that it wouldn't even be possible without Lift Bridge Builders and Rick Vizina, who owns and operates that business. And happens to be my brother-in-law.
Yeah, I recognize the name from your mother-in-law's book.
I've known him for 40 years now, and we have a very good relationship, and we have mutual trust. And it's a project that, as soon as I got the harebrained idea to become an accidental developer, he was the call to make. And so we talked, and without his involvement, this project would not be happening. So a real big shout out and thank you to Rick and Lift Bridge Builders for their involvement. And Rick, incidentally, was involved in this building and this project for a lot of years, even before I came on the scene.
Sat on a lot of committees. And
Landmark, the Living Landmark Committee, and other things to try and save the building. But when we finally decided that this is something that him and I together as partners wanted to be involved with, our first look was to go through the building and say, what's the foundation like? You know, what is the roof structure like? What are the the fundamental basic building blocks? Because if the foundation isn't any good or the roof is rotted out, that $4 million would been eaten up, and we wouldn't have gotten anywhere. So we found that the building itself is very sound. It's on a great foundation. The whole first floor around the perimeter of the building is solid concrete walls, 18 inches thick.
It's a fallout shelter.
It's yeah. If anything ever happens, that's the building to go to right there.
Yeah,
it's really built well. So that allowed us to say, yes, this building is restorable.
So I want to go back to the why, but in full disclosure, because I am the mayor in St. Croix Falls and I was on the city council with you, and oddly enough, nobody's even asked the question of why you took it on. We can go back a couple of years. And please, if you're watching, we do have live viewers, so if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them on there. Hopefully you're enjoying the content. I get fascinated by this, but when I joined the city council, I made no qualms about the fact that the information I had was that this was a flushing toilet on the city's budget, and so I was against this project. However, I got put on the committee as a city council person to, it was kind of a joke, like, well, guess what committee you get to be on? You get to be on the auditorium committee. And so I got to read through the documents, read through the lease that was signed by the former tenant, read through the history of the auditorium, and I changed my mind, which is, ask my wife, that's pretty rare. So I changed my mind and I said, you know what, I actually think this would be ridiculously dumb not to do. And so I changed my mind. That didn't make some of the people that were on the city council happy, because I took a different stand than I even ran on. And I started to fight for the auditorium to use those funds that were set aside so that they wouldn't get lost. I mean, it was either we're going to invest this money in our downtown and make this building what it should be, or we're going to just lose it, most of it, to giving it back to the taxing agencies. And they would have gladly accepted it, the county, the school, and all those. So we set out on an endeavor and fought tooth and nail to keep this project alive. And ultimately what we needed to do was find a way to make it a for-profit, tax incremental thing to get people to not be frustrated with it. And we did. We found 2 different companies, and while we're doing that, we've got all these grants that are expiring soon, and they're like, hey, we're going to take our money back if you don't get this project done, because we're talking from 2015 to 2022. That's 7 years of like, hey, you've got our money, let's go here. And 2 of those fell through. And you're on the council and you don't want to do this project.
No.
But at some point you said, and I think it's serendipitous, I don't know if that's the right word, but it sounds right. Your family history, I mean, like, you're the guy who should do this project because it is in your blood. I can imagine your great-great-grandfather scooping a golden shovel saying, we're going to build this thing. And I mean, how cool is that?
That's
and so when you
cool.
stepped up and said, Kirk, I think I'm going to step off the board, which I did not want you to do. That was not a good thing because we were making progress. I said, you know what? Who else would do this? And you're going to get it done. So go back to why, and you can talk about whatever you want, but why is it so important that this gets done? Like, who cares if an old building sits there? Wouldn't it be nice to have a Kohl's there, or, a Target?
Well, you know, some folks would agree with that. I think a lot of folks had so many memories in this building growing up over the years themselves or their families, and I've just hear it time after time after time about I saw this movie or that movie, or we did this in the auditorium, and boy was it, you know, really neat.
Right.
And part of my childhood. And you know, like Rick and his sister, my wife, they grew up on Adams Street, right behind the auditorium. So they were running through that building since they were, you know, knee high to, so yeah, that was a motivator for sure. The family connection there was pretty strong, and you know, you mentioned the financial side with the possibly not doing the project and giving the money back to the taxing jurisdictions, one of those being the school. And if I understand it correctly, it would have ended up being a net neutral for them, because
It would have actually went back to the state.
it would have gone back to the state, so the school district would not have really garnered any benefit from having that. So they were not excited about getting the money back at all.
No.
As
I mean,
far as that goes.
Yeah, there was a glimpse of, well, maybe we could get that money, but it was pretty obvious that like they got paid already, so the state doesn't hold them when we withhold taxes from a certain area and put them into a TIF district so that we can use that money for you know, infrastructure or something. The state makes sure that the school is 100%. They don't lose funding, where the other ones do. So the county and the city don't get to use that for general funds. So
Right.
yeah.
So, you know, the city, would have had some benefit had it collapsed. But then the city would have been on the hook for tearing the building down and, you know, re-prepping that site, which would have been a pretty big cost. So the net amount that the city would have really gotten in the end was negligible, really, in comparison to you're turning down, you know, $3 million that the TIF generated for specifically for this project, and in the end, the city might get, you know, $100,000 or $200,000
After all the
net,
fees.
after all of the fees and everything. So weigh it out. I mean, I believe that it was a very good decision, and on the city's part, and I commend them for that. The other part of this is that you mentioned is the city council, through a lot of debate, decided that the building needed to be sold to a private developer and not held in the municipality as a city-owned building.
Right.
So that was supported unanimously by the council. It was sold actually to another developer. And a year and a half later, that developer, who at the time that I was on the council, they didn't do anything. They didn't move the project forward.
Right.
And eventually, after a year and a half, decided to bail on the project. So now the city in 2021 got the building back.
Which we didn't want.
And you didn't want it back, right?
I'm going to pause for a second. Chris said, it's wonderful to see history restored instead of being torn down. These old buildings have a lot of history and charm to the Main Street. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah, go back to your...
Yeah, so I was sitting on the council at that time, and all of a sudden the city got the building back again, and it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So the resurfacing of, well, maybe we should just tear it down. That was a conversation, and that's when I said, time out. I can't really allow that to happen. I think this building is too important to this community and too important to our future as at least a catalyst to restoring our downtown corridor. I feel really strongly that by bringing more people into the community, having that as an active building will really help the entire Main Street, which is a real big priority for me and you as well, obviously.
Well, and I think we see it already. You know, as you're doing this, other people are seeing it, other building owners, and they're saying, "Man, I got to get my building looking a little fresher." And so, not only did you start this project, other people are renovating their space. Like Valley Suites has a very old building that was attached to the dam, and they put in a lower level full kitchen so that they could have a bakery, and redid their space. I mean, they've got a beautiful deck that they're putting out there. We as a city bought 3 dilapidated buildings. 2 of them are very historical, Clayton Hardware and the original St. Croix Falls Bank. Those will be brought up to a certain level of safety and then sold to somebody who will turn them into businesses. And we already have one buyer who's going to put in a successful clothing store that's across the street. It's going to move over once they renovate that space. And then the hardware store, you know, we're still working with the person who wants to buy it to see what we can do there. But that right there, with some new restaurants and some new businesses coming in, this place is busy on Friday, almost too busy. You know, I don't want to say that, knock on wood, but my goodness, is it hard to find a parking spot on Friday night?
Well, parking is an issue in St. Croix Falls.
Right,
I
we're
know
working on that too.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's really exciting to see how that all transpired.
Yeah, so at that point, you know, somebody had to step in, and I guess at the bottom line to me was, we have to stop talking about this project and start doing the project. We've talked it to death. We've read that piece of paper and we've turned it over, and we've read the backside and we turned it over. You know, we just kept talking and talking about it. And so anyway, that's why I call, you know, myself and Rick accidental developers.
Right.
So we jumped in because we just felt very strongly that it needed doing. And so we're very glad to be here and glad to be doing. It's actually a fun project. It's the amount of decisions is they're astronomical. It's crazy. So the local aspect of ownership for this building is crucial.
Yeah.
I think
It'd be really hard to come from Minneapolis every day to do this
would
project.
not have, and I think that's what the previous developer, that's part of, you know, COVID was in there too, but I think it was just too far of a distance for that to even work out for them. So,
well, I'm gonna we're talking a lot, and so I want to be respectful of people's times. I got a bunch of pictures that I'm going to run through, and we can just maybe do a little popcorn conversation on them to talk about the difficulties in a 100-year-old business building. And so this is part of the electrical system, electrical all over the building, boxes, wires. You tore a good chunk, if not all of that out, and had Andre Electric in there redoing an awful lot of stuff. How's the electrical now?
Well, it's coming along. Actually, you know, I chose that picture to show you because the electrical situation in the building was an absolute nightmare, as you can kind of tell there in that photograph. And a real big shout out to Jared and his group. Derek has been spending a lot of time in our building reworking a lot of, so Andre Electric, you know, very local, obviously, and wanted to be involved in the project. I'm not sure he feels the same way now after, you know, when you look
crawling
at this
around
stuff.
in the doldrums.
It was a real nightmare for them to figure out what was going on. So a lot of this stuff is, you know, goes by the wayside.
It's on that trailer that we saw earlier.
Yeah. So they're getting through it.
So when you first got the building, there were some issues. There was a flood in like 2015 or 16. I was on the fire department. I shared a video of you when the building was flooding because the heat, the furnace broke. The belt on the furnace broke. The heat went down to 0. It's a cold night, and all the pipes blew.
All the pipes
So
blew.
this looks like it's different, though. This
is going up from the first floor space up the stairway to the mezzanine, and in that area there's a rain leader pipe that comes down inside the building to drain the water from the roof. And for years, what happened, since there was no heat in the building, is it got cold. The water would drain down that pipe, and it would freeze at the bottom and freeze all the way back up to the top, and it blew the joint up in the attic. And so all of the water from the roof was draining right into the building, and you see a little bit of that there. And this is a recent picture. That was 2022.
okay. So just before you took possession.
Just before we took
So this has all been
possession,
fixed. Luckily,
is
the
all-
heat's going to stay on, and you redid
This is
the
all
roof.
fixed.
That was one of the first things you did, was the roof, which was a beautiful job that they did, and it'll look great when they finish the stucco. All the pipes.
All
So
of
you
the
had a lot-
pipes.
every
so-
pipe in there seemed to have been broken.
And, for that major freeze that happened in 2015 there, that it just blew everything out. So we had no alternative but to resource, go all new. So all of that was ripped out. And that was incidentally only one trailer load. There were many
I'm sure.
of those.
Yeah.
So
Anytime you went out to your site, I drive up Louisiana to go home, so I would look at all the pipes, all the boxes, all the sheetrock. I saw truckloads of sheetrock coming in. I go, oh, he's sheetrocking. I mean, it was like 3 semis full of.
Yeah.
I've never seen so much sheetrock,
Yeah,
and I
that's right.
felt bad
That's
for
right.
whoever had to carry that in.
That's right.
Because you're not
That's
doing
right.
it with a machine. A lot of cranes. So this is the addition, the elevator pit, I would assume.
This is the elevator tower, the north tower, and this photo, we're just setting the precast roof on the balcony level of the tower there.
Yeah, so one of the struggles that the previous tenant had was that they would invite people on buses, and grandma and grandma would want to come see their kids in plays or musical acts, and they didn't have a way to get them upstairs without walking up essentially 3 flights of steps by the time you're done, or a really rickety, scary thing on the outside. And so this elevator is a very key ingredient to the success of this building.
Absolutely. It's a 4-stop elevator, so it hits every floor in the auditorium. All ADA compliant new bathrooms in that tower as well. It'll be quite a nice addition to the building. So this is pumper cement pumping truck. We were pouring the floors in those separate floors. You have to put a layer of cement on, and the only way they could get to the mezzanine level was over the top of the building and into the doorway to get the cement in there. So that's why you see that going all the way over. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, incidentally, if you look at the windows on here, they have 100, and those were advertisements that the previous 2 mayors ago put up to advertise that we're going to do this project. He was for this project, and there they sit, and they are faded and look like they're as old as the building, but really they're only 7 years old. I remember when they put them up there. And underneath that is plywood that's been covering these windows for a very long time, and I've got some photos where we're going to show it actually removing those.
Yeah, and that was a big thing because that plywood had been in place for a long time. So we did not know when we purchased the building if the original windows were still in there or if they were just gutted and they plywood. Because inside that space, that's where they put the acoustical panels, and they acoustic paneled right over the window openings.
Right.
There was,
and you've opened all that up in the theater space. It's
Right.
You took the drop ceiling out, and it's going to look original and beautiful. I can't wait to see the final product. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
So this is some original windows from the inside. You can still see some plywood on the outside, but how were the windows? Like what kind of
You know, it's
how much repair did you have to do?
Well, it was a very good day when we started opening up those windows. Hadn't seen the light of day for 80 years or thereabouts. It was a long time ago, and you know, to our really positive surprise, those sashes in the windows were intact. It's a lot of the old wavy original glass in those. And this is the very top of the windows in the auditorium space. The floor that you see there is the scaffolding floor that we had to put up. It's a 40-foot by 50-foot wide scaffolding, complete, we call it the dance floor, that's about 6 feet below the original ceilings. So we had access to get up there and do the things that we had to do. But so yeah, the plywood is still over the main parts of those windows because we were able to remove the sashes, redo all of those. They are just this week ready to start putting them back in, so that's going to be a pretty exciting day too.
So the auditorium ceiling is very high, so this scaffolding is way up there. You got to have some guts to get up there. You're up at the ceiling level, and are you drywalling all that then?
Yes, that'll all be drywalled. We would have loved to restore the original plaster ceilings, but if you look a little closely there, it would have been a tremendous job, and it would have eaten up so much of our budget to try and restore the plaster.
Sure.
That is not an inexpensive process. So
Right.
the decision was made to put sound channel in. That's the metal that you see there, and then actually this week, right now, they're sheetrocking that ceiling.
So a little construction meeting with some of your guys. Very cool. And this is the exterior. Some of the outside windows on the south side face. So we'd be going north, I guess. So it's the south side, right?
Yes. Yep.
And that's where those pictures were. Were on there. So when those came off, I mean, you can see how faded the paint was, and the pictures that were put up there, just vinyl. Celebrating 100 years. So that was a long time ago.
So incidentally, you can see in that photo the brick on the bottom, on the sill portion. All of that had to be fixed. You know, there's a lot of masonry work that had to be done. All of the actual window sills, the reason that lift truck or lift on the right there is because all of the sills of the original window frames all rotted out, all had to be replaced and refurbished. So
and because you're a historic, like nationally registered historic building, they have to be restored properly, right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Like you got to jump through some hoops to make sure that you do it right.
And
otherwise you can lose funding.
And yes, that's exactly right. And to get, you have to, the process is about 4 months. Every time you say, I need to do something to that building to tuck point those brick sills, for example, it's a 4-month process to get the approval through the state and the federal government to allow you to actually do the work.
Well, we appreciate it after the fact, but while you're in the midst of this deadline-driven project, it's got to be a little bit like, come on, let's go here. We'll do the right thing. So this is some flooring got pulled up, and you found this old, you know, what I would say, like the Amish will give you some sawn, you know, planking. You're not getting this at Home Depot or Menards. Right. So this is probably some pretty thick lumber. Where is this, and what are we looking at?
That's on the mezzanine, and that's really the subfloor before they put down the solid maple flooring that you see on top of it. In the past, they had cut out a portion of it. I don't know if it failed or whatever. So this is just exposing kind of the structure underneath the floor, and the horizontal aspect is well, that was back in the day just to keep everything true and square and tighten it up and make it stronger, so it was always done on a horizontal plane like that.
Yeah, really interesting when you get to the guts of something and you start thinking, you know, I think nostalgically. So how long ago was that floor put in? I mean, you're talking, that floor's been there for
Well, that
a
was the original,
long time.
that was the original part of the 2016 build. So yeah, that's
pretty
been-
interesting. So we talked about a flood back in 2015, 16-ish. I don't remember the date. I just started the fire department, got a call, came down here, and water was pushing out the front doors, and my boots go up to my knees, and the water was starting to go inside my boots. So we found the shutoff valve, this is the main shutoff valve area, all broken. We ended up calling the city workers. They shut it off at the curb stop, and there were actually icicles that looked like jousting, you know, whatever those things are called, just laying on the ground. The pipe would break and they would slide out a chunk of ice about 8-10 feet long, and there was water everywhere. So,
you know, and as the result of one belt failure on the boiler, that's what's caused a lot of damage to that building. Obviously, all of that had to be repaired and actually removed.
Yeah.
And then on the right there you see the new has taken its place. So we have, we went from, in the original building on the left there were probably 3 shutoff valves in the building for the main water supply. If you look over here with the new piping, 25 different shutoff valves now. So
well, good.
We are not.
That's fantastic.
It's pretty interesting.
One of the big things that is important in today's day and age is energy costs and efficiency and treating the environment well. And so you took out, I didn't do anything. You took out all that old boilers and all the inefficient stuff. One of the complaints I remember reading through the documents was the cost of how much it was to heat that space. It was
Sure.
astronomical.
Sure.
And so, yes, they got a great deal from the city on the lease, but they were responsible for maintenance and heating and everything else, and they were going to go bankrupt because it was just inefficient. So you're putting in very efficient equipment.
Yeah, as best we can, yeah. So 95, 90, you know, plus efficient furnaces. Incidentally, we are going from the original one boiler that heated the entire building by radiator to 10 separate furnaces to heat it in zones. And here's a picture of one of the rooftop furnaces being set. This is just a couple of weeks ago here. So we have 4 rooftop units that will heat and cool the theater space upstairs, and additional furnaces to work for the downstairs space. So
I'll make a note on this one. If you look under the crane, the sirens, which everybody who lives in St. Croix Falls hears downtown, is there. And the historic nature of this, the city has been asked to keep them on there if possible, because they're historic part of the building to some degree. Although they're aged, and so as long as they're working, you know, we can try and work that out. But that's part of the history. Everybody knows that the sirens are on the theater, the auditorium building. So kind of an interesting thing that you can see there. And
yeah, and we're glad to have it there, and hopefully that it can stay there going forward.
Here's some shots of the elevator on the outside, and a lot of work went into putting the brick in, and then the final kind of look for that addition is beautiful.
Yeah, and just incidentally, the reason that it looks pretty plain, it is beautiful. It's clean lines, But as part of the historical register, building, we cannot put something onto that building that competes with the facade look of the original footprint.
Sure.
So it's on purpose that looks pretty subdued in comparison to the western facade of the building.
Has to stand out a little bit, the original. Lot of mud.
A lot of
I talked
sheetrock,
about
a lot of
that
mud.
day that the trucks came in and I took pictures of the semis, and I mean, it was like so much drywall.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad though, because drywall finishes well. It'll be really nice, and because of the air conditioning and the heating that will be in there, it'll last for a long time.
Incidentally, this is the east addition. This will be the big bay, open bay there is the loading dock area.
Okay, so this is in the back of the building. I think I have a picture of that in here too. This is some of the auditorium.
No,
this is the
down,
lower level.
yeah,
So okay,
that's
so
lower
sheetrocking everything.
So just looking at we've peeled back the sidewalls to get to the original plaster. Like you mentioned before, took out the drop ceiling that was in there that actually covered up at least half or more of the window openings there.
Yeah, it's
So
amazing how
we're-
low those ceilings were dropped down.
Yeah,
they didn't want
yeah.
that big space for
Right,
basketball.
and now we're putting that big space up, and so you see the all new sheetrock in there, and we'll polish that floor up, and that's going to be a pretty nice looking space there too.
So one of the big expenses that could have happened, and it's probably still a big expense to repair the stucco, but we had originally talked about, boy, it's in rough shape, so we're going to re-stucco. Now it's partly because of the historic nature of it. They don't want you to do that. So you're repairing it, and you're going to paint it so that it looks new, and
Right.
that's supposed to last a long time. What kind of labor-intensive work is this? That's a big building.
It is, you can see that patching going on, and all of those kind of represent crack lines that are ground out and then caulked, and then a brown coat is put over, and then a mesh is put over the top of that, and then another coat of brown coat is put on top of that, and then it's dashed, they call it. It's re-stuccoed to make it match the rest of the facade there. So it's very labor intensive, and these guys in particular have done a just fantastic job for
Great.
us.
Can't wait to see
We're excited.
that finished. So that back loading dock in the rear of the building will allow for things to be brought in through the back, and that's a nice
Yeah,
addition.
incidentally, there's a lift in there, so it's not just a loading dock area. You bring in, a piano or, musical instruments, whatever is needed, and then it lifts it up to the actual stage level of backstage. So it'll be a very nice addition, and actually will help get acts and people, music companies to come in, because they say that's one of their first questions. How do we, get things in and out of the building? That will really help secure that.
Well, that's the pictures that I have. I mean, we're still in construction. I'm sure that you're recording everything, and at some point are going to put together kind of a scrapbook of sorts. Hopefully digital. You're not going to do it real
because it
slow.
would be
Yeah.
it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos.
Yeah, I'm sure you're using up a hard drive on that. But I want to thank you for coming in and sharing that. Before you go, what's the future look like for that space? You already have some tenants that you're working with. You're trying to look for other tenants or solidify. I don't know where you're at that process. So what do you want in that building? What's like the end goal here?
Well, first and foremost, we're so excited to have Festival Theater in our community, and they will be our anchor tenant in the theater space. We love having them. They're, it's a perfect complement, obviously, to this building. Getting them back in and now allowing them to perform in front of a 270 seat
Right.
instead of where they currently
It's
are.
about 70.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
So
it'd be really nice.
it'll be a big help to them and us, obviously. And we're also working with other venues on the music side to bring in events there. And working on the first floor space, you know, our goal is to entice a restaurateur to come in and open up a restaurant in that space. So if anybody has any connections, please get them to us. We're still in process of doing that. We have an active Facebook page, as you're aware. The Historic Auditorium, look that up on Facebook. Follow us there. We have an active website. thehistoricauditorium.com will get you to our website, and yeah.
Yeah. So the logo that you chose was from that original photo, and you just turned it into more of a vector, cartoony looking thing. But it's basically an outline of that original photo that we showed at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
And instead of it being the St. Croix Falls Historic Civic Auditorium, it's just the Historic Auditorium, because now it's yours.
Yeah,
Don't try and give it back. We don't want it back. But I look forward to. I really look forward, because I have kids that are musical and drama. A lot of drama in my house, but they perform at the professional theater, at the Festival Theater in town, and some of my kids have performed upward of 12, 13 shows over the years, and so they're very committed to that, and they're just chomping at the bit to get back in the Civic Auditorium and the Historic Auditorium. Yeah. So for more information, do check the Facebook page out and thehistoricauditorium.com. Thank you, Jeff Virchow, for being here and telling your story.
Thanks for having me.
We'll come back when we cut that ribbon and get you back on the show. And thank you for those who commented and stuck with us for the show. It was a longer show today, but we got through it, and I'm really excited for this one. So everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.